Hi, you guys. It's TA Megan, and I know we have a lot of time off of school this week. So I thought that I would read a longer book than normal and post different chapters. So if you get bored without us doing school, you can listen and watch me read a book. And do you remember last week? Teacher Ann put up a fun project about making a collage of items around our house that are based on a book that we like. And I did mine on Pippi in the South Seas. Well, I am going to read you the book. Let's go. All right, Pippi in the South Seas. And I got this book from my mom. There's her handwriting. And it says, "To Megan, my very own little Pippi. Love always, Mom." Now that's my nickname, Pippi, because I love this book so much. So if there's a picture in the book, I'll show it to you. That's Pippi's house called Villa Kula. Here's chapter 1. The little Swedish town was very picturesque. With its cobblestone streets, its tiny houses and gardens that surrounded them, everyone who visited there must have felt that this would be a calm and restful place to live. But as far as tourist attractions went, there wasn't much to see. Almost nothing. In fact, there was a folklore museum and an old grave mound, and that was all. But wait! There was one more thing. The people of the little town had neatly and carefully put up signs to show visitors the way to the sights. "To the Folklore Museum" was printed in large letters on one sign with an arrow underneath. "To the Grave Mound" read another sign with an arrow. There was a third sign saying in a rather crooked letters, "To Villa Kula." The sign had been put up quite recently. It had often happened lately that people would come and ask how to get to Villa Kula. As a matter of fact, more often than they would ask the way to the local museum or the grave mound. One beautiful summer day, a man came driving through the little town. He lived in a much bigger town, and therefore he considered himself finer and more distinguished than the people who lived in the smaller towns. Then, too, he had a very fine car, and he was a grand person, with shoes that were polished till they gleamed, and a thick gold ring on his finger. So it was perhaps not so strange that he thought himself as fine and distinguished. When he drove through the streets, he honked his horn loudly, "Honk, honk, honk," so that everyone would notice him as he went by. When the fine gentleman saw the signposts, he laughed heartily. "To the Folklore Museum? How do you like that?" he said to himself. "I could do without that." "To the grave mound," he read on the other sign. "This is getting better and better." "But what sort of nonsense is that?" he thought when he saw the third sign. "To Villa Kula? What a name!" He thought about this for a moment. A villa could hardly be a tourist attraction, in the same way that a folklore museum or a grave mound was. He decided that the sign must have been put there for another reason. Finally, the answer came to him. The villa was, of course, for sale. The sign had been put up to show the way to the people who might want to buy the house. For a long time, the fine gentleman himself had been thinking that he would buy a house in a small town where there was not so much noise as in his big city. Naturally, he would not live there all the time, but he would go there to rest now and then. In a small town, people would also much be more likely to notice what an unusually fine and distinguished man that he really was. He decided to go have a look at the Villa Villacula right away. All he had to do was follow the direction of the arrow, but he had to drive to the edge of the town before he found what he was looking for. And there, printed with red crayon on a very broken down garden gate, he read, Villa Villacula. Inside the gate was an overgrown garden with old trees covered with moss, an unmowed lawn, and lots of flowers, which were allowed to grow exactly as they pleased. At the end of the garden was a house, and what a house! It looked as if it would fall to pieces at any minute. The fine gentleman stared at it, and all of a sudden he groaned. A horse was standing in the veranda. The fine gentleman wasn't used to horses standing on verandas. That is why he had groaned. On the veranda steps, 3 small children were sitting in the sunshine. The girl in the middle had lots of freckles all over her face and 2 pigtails which stuck straight out. And a pretty blonde, curly-haired little girl in a blue checkered dress and a little boy with neatly combed hair sat on either side of her. On the shoulder of the red-headed girl sat a monkey. The fine gentleman was puzzled. He must have the wrong house. Surely no one would think there was a possibility of selling such a tumbled-down shack. Now, when I was little, I colored the pictures, so you get to see some coloring. But here's the pictures of the man and the horse and the monkey and the 3 children, and I colored it. Listen, children, he called out to them. Is this miserable hovel really the Villa Villacula? The girl in the middle, the red-headed one, got up and came to the gate. The other 2 trudged slowly behind. Have you lost your tongue? Said the gentleman before the red-headed girl had reached him. Is this shack the Villa Villacula? Let me think, said the red-headed girl and frowned. It isn't the museum, and it isn't the grave mound. Now I have it, she cried. It is the Villa Villacula. Don't be so rude, said the fine gentleman, and got out of the car. He decided to take a closer look at the place. I could, of course, tear this house down, and yes, build another one, he had mumbled to himself. Yeah, let's start right away, cried the little red-headed girl, and she ran back into the house and briskly started to rip a few boards off the gable. The fine gentleman paid no attention to her. He wasn't interested in the children. And besides, he had now had something on his mind. The garden in its wild state really looked quite pleasant and attractive in the sunshine. If a new house were built, the lawns cut, the paths raked, the flowers properly planted, even a very fine gentleman like I could live here, the fine gentleman decided that he would buy the Villa Villacula. He looked all around, trying to think of more ways to improve this place. And of course, the old moss-covered trees would have to go. He glared sourly at the old gnarled oak with its tremendous trunk and its branches, which were arched over the roof of the Villa Villacula. Ooh, I'll have to cut that one down, he said with with finality. The pretty little girl in the blue checkered dress cried out in a frightened voice, "Oh, Pippi, did you hear?" Unconcerned, the red-headed girl continued to skip around the garden path. "Yes, I'll chop down that old, rotten, terrible oak tree," the fine gentleman mumbled to himself. The little girl in the blue checkered dress stretched her hands towards him, pleading. "Oh, no, don't do that," she said. "It's such a wonderful tree to climb, and it's hollow, so we can play inside of it." "Nonsense," said the fine gentleman. "I don't climb trees. You ought to understand that." The boy with the neatly combed hair came forward. He looked anxious. "But, sir, soda pop grows in that tree," he said imploringly. "And chocolate, too, on Thursdays." "Listen, I think you kids have been sitting in the sun too long," said the fine gentleman. "Everything seems to be going round and round in your heads. But that's none of my business. I'm going to buy this place. Can you tell me where I can find the owner?" The little blue checkered girl began to cry, and the little boy with the neatly combed hair ran up to the red-headed girl who was still skipping. "Pippi, he said, don't you hear what he's saying? Why don't you do something?" "Why don't I do something? Why don't I do something? Why don't I do something?" echoed the red-headed girl. "Here I am, skipping for all I'm worth, and when you tell me I'm not doing anything, skip yourself and see how easy it is." She walked over to the fine gentleman. "My name is Pipalata Longstockings," she said, "and this is Tommy and Annika." She pointed to her friends. "Is there anything we can do for you? Tear down a house or chop down a tree, maybe? Or is there anything else that needs to be changed? Just say the word." "Your names don't interest me," laughed the fine gentleman. "The only thing I would like to know is where I can find the owner of this disreputable place. I intend to buy it." The red-headed girl, the one called Pippi Longstockings, had gone back to her skipping. "The owner is quite busy right now," she said, and she kept on skipping in a very determined way as she talked. "As a matter of fact, terribly busy," she said, skipping around the fine gentleman. "But sit down and wait a while, and she'll probably come along." "She?" said the fine gentleman with a pleased look. "Is it she who owns this miserable house? So much the better. Women just simply don't understand business, you see. In that case, there's hope of getting it cheap." "We can always hope," said Pippi Longstocking. And there didn't seem to be any other place to sit down, so the fine gentleman sat down on the veranda steps. The monkey anxiously leapt back and forth on the railing. Tommy and Annika were standing at a distance, looking at him in a very frightened way. "Do you live here?" asked the fine gentleman. "No," said Tommy. "We live in the villa next door." "But we come here every day to play," said Annika. "Well, there will be an end to that now," said the fine gentleman. "I don't want any youngsters running about in my garden. Children are the worst things that I know." "I think so, too," said Pippi, and she stopped skipping for a second. "All children ought to be shot." "How can you say that?" said Tommy hurt. "Yeah, I mean it." All children ought to be shot, said Pippi. But that isn't possible, because then no nice little uncles would ever grow up, and we can't do without them uncles. The fine gentleman looked at Pippi's red hair and decided to have a little fun while he was waiting. Do you know why you're like a newly lighted match? He asked. No, said Pippi. But I've always wondered. The fine gentleman pulled one of Pippi's pigtails quite hard. Both of you are fiery on top. Ha 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 ha! Oh, one has to listen to a lot before their ears fall off, said Pippi. How strange I haven't happened to think of that before. The fine gentleman looked at her and said, I really quite think that you're the ugliest child I've ever seen. Well, said Pippi, you're not exactly beautiful yourself. The fine gentleman looked hurt, but he didn't say anything. Pippi stood and looked at him in silence for a while, with her head tilted to one side. Do you know what, in a way, you and I are alike? Well, just between us, said the fine gentleman, I hope there is no likeliness. But there is, said Pippi. Both of us have big mouths. Except me. A faint giggle could be heard from Tommy and Annika. So, you're being insolent, the man shouted. But I'll soon thrash it out of you. And he reached out his fat arm to grab Pippi, but she quickly jumped to one side, and a second later she was sitting perched on the hollow oak. The fine gentleman gaped in astonishment. When are we going to start with that thrashing, hey? Asked Pippi as she made herself comfortable on a branch. I have all the time to wait, said the fine gentleman. Good, said Pippi, because I'm thinking of staying up here till the middle of November. Tommy and Annika laughed and clapped their hands. But they shouldn't have done, because now the fine gentleman was terribly angry. When he couldn't reach Pippi, he grabbed Annika by the nape of her neck and said, Then I'll give you a hiding instead. It seems as if you need one too. Annika had never in her life been spanked, and she let out a cry of pain and fright. No! There was a thud as Pippi jumped out of the tree. With one leap, she was standing beside the fine gentleman. Oh, no, you don't, she said. Better not start a fight now. Then she grabbed the fine gentleman around his fat waist, and she threw him up into the air several times. And on her outstretched arm, she carried him to his car and threw him down in the back seat. I think we'll wait to tear down the house until another day, said Pippi. You see, one day a week I tear down houses, but never on a Friday, because that is house cleaning day. Therefore, I usually vacuum the house on the Friday and tear it down on the Saturday. Everything has its own time. With great difficulty, the fine gentleman scrambled up to the steering wheel and drove off in great haste. That means fast. He was both frightened and angry, and it annoyed him that he hadn't been able to talk to the actual owner of the Villa Villacula. He was anxious to buy the place and chase away those nasty little children. Then he met one of the town policemen, and he stopped his car and said, "Can you help me find the lady who owns the Villa Coola?" "With great pleasure," said the policeman. He hopped into the car and said, "Drive down to the Villa Coola, then." No, she isn't there," said the fine gentleman. "Ah, yeah, I'm sure she is," said the policeman. And the fine gentleman felt quite safe with the policeman along, so he drove back to the Villa Coola, as the policeman had told him to. He was very eager to talk to the owner. There's the lady who owns the Villa Coola," said the policeman, and pointed towards the house. The fine gentleman looked in the direction in which the policeman was pointing. He put his hand on his forehead and groaned, "Oh!" There on the veranda steps was the red-headed girl, that awful Pippi Longstocking, and on her outstretched arms she was carrying the horse. The monkey was sitting on her left shoulder. "Hi, Tommy! Hi, Annika!" shouted Pippi. "Let's go for a ride before the next spectaculator comes along." "It's called a speculator," said Annika. "Is that the owner of the Villa Coola?" said the fine gentleman in a weak voice. "But she's only a little girl." "Yes," said the policeman, "only a little girl. The strongest little girl in the world. She lives there all alone." The horse with the 3 children on his back came galloping towards the gate. Pippi looked down at the fine gentleman and said, "It was so fun to solve all the riddles with you a while ago. Come to think of it, I know one more. Can you tell me what the difference is between my horse and my monkey?" The fine gentleman was really not in the mood to solve riddles anymore. But he gained so much respect for Pippi that he didn't dare not to answer. "The difference between your horse and your monkey, that I really couldn't say." "It's quite tricky," said Pippi, "but I'll give you a small hint. If you could see them both together under a tree, and one of them should start to climb up the tree, then that one isn't the horse." The fine gentleman pressed his gas pedal all the way down to the floor and took off in a roar. He never came back to the little town. All right, that's the end of chapter 1. Pippi is quite the character. All right, see you in chapter 2. Bye.